Good day, my name is Oyewale and welcome to 3 Points. Today we'll be talking about the topic that we'll be discussing a topic that is very important, and that's biases in data. In the past few episodes, we've been discussing data, establishing the relationship between data and football. And for me, data is something that is very fundamental, operating on fundamental principles that are not limited just to any sector. And that's why I have the privilege of discussing this topic with a friend of mine, a well-known and well-experienced data professional, Olayinka. Okay.
Hi, thank you, Iwale, for having me on this episode. And I find it really interesting that you're trying to find the intersection of football and data. And so I'm super excited and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I will just try as much as possible to go straight to the point and let's start diving into the conversation. Bias in data, is this something we just made up, or is something that is actually real?
Oh, no, we didn't make it up. There's a popular saying that I like to use a lot. And the saying says, if you torture the data, it will confess to anything. And that means that even while everybody is trying to be data driven, anybody who has an agenda or an opinion that they are trying to push, if you know how to twist your data well enough, you can make the data to support that bias that you already have. So what I'm saying basically is bias is inherent in data.
Oh, bias is inherent in data. And I mean, from my own understanding, I also understand the fact that one of the things we try to figure out in using data in our system is, okay, you can have like a data-driven system, you can have a data-informed system, you can have a data-inspired system. And now that you're saying is inherent, that automatically means if I'm not handling it or if I'm not conscious about this, I can actually be misinformed.
Exactly. So because if you're just like blindly trying to be data driven and you're not extra conscious of bias, then there is a high chance that you would be biased even while you're being data driven. So it's important to have a holistic approach to being conscious of removing bias in all aspects of like the life cycle of how you're using your data. So it requires a conscious effort to limit the bias or the impact of the bias.
So you've mentioned two things now, and that's the fact that it needs to be a conscious effort. So which means you need to first admit that the possibility of you introducing the bias. And you also said something around the fact that it needs to be a holistic approach. So what do you mean when you say holistic approach to data systems?
So when I say it has to be holistic, it means that a data lifecycle of any kind of data project starts from when you're collecting the data. So what I'm saying is from the point where you're collecting the data, you need to be conscious of what are the things you need to do to make sure that the data you're collecting is not biased. And so you start from the beginning, and everybody who is involved in any part of the project has to have that consciousness that, hey, you need to be sure that you're not being biased. So where you're collecting the data, where you're analyzing it, where you're reporting it, even where you're putting out the output that people are going to use, you need to be sure that you're not being biased in all of those areas too.
So now, when you say bias now, and you talk about the aspect of gathering, so which means you need to have like a clarity about your objective, even from the beginning.
Oh, definitely. So I'll give an example since we're now talking about football. So for example, you want to build a data science model that predicts the chance that this footballer that I want to invest in is going to return my investment. When you want to build that model, for example, maybe so you want to collect data about previous footballers who have been successful, you cannot just collect data from footballers in England and then use it to build a model. And you want to use it you want people all over the world to be able to use that model to predict the return on investment for a footballer, because that model is going to only fit England. So the model is already biased towards England. So you need to collect data. If the model is going to be used by football managers all over the world, then you need to collect data about successful footballers from all over the world, because there would be some of the input variables that are peculiar to specific geographical locations. And if you don't collect data from everywhere, your model is already going to be biased.
No, but if you look at the example you just described now, but if I limit my objective to using that model for just England, then we can say that there's no bias in my collection.
Oh, well, so that's in your collection. So if you're going to use the model only in England, then of course you can collect data from like footballers in England or whatnot. And that way your collection is, well, in that aspect, is not biased. There are other areas where bias can come in. For example, when you're collecting, if you're doing, maybe in your data collection, you're doing a survey and you're asking a question, you don't want it to be open-ended, so use a closed-ended question. I mean, it's 2023, so we know that your gender field cannot be male and female.
Okay.
So those are the ways that, because if you put your gender field male and female, again, you're already biased, because you're assuming that everybody is either male or female. But it's 2023, people can be they, them, she, we, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, let's just try as much as possible to narrow it to the context of football, and for now we just have like male and female football. Of course, there is a bit of fluidity between those, and for me, still talking about the aspect of data collection and where bias can come in that. Now, I'm thinking, if I'm trying to gather data I'm trying to build a model that is going to be applicable, that people are going to find useful across the globe, right? But when it comes to data, one thing we can all agree on is that data collection itself, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And it's also almost, I'm trying not to use the word impossible here, to get data in some areas. So for instance, now, I can easily get data for English footballers in England, German footballers in Germany, even up to the local level to some extent. Now, if I'm trying to like capture as many countries, as many demographics as possible, that means I will also need to like get data from those areas, which might not be easier.
So I think that was an aspect that I also did mention that can lead to bias in your data collection, which is inclusivity. And inclusivity most times has to do with the method of your data collection. So for example, there are different, you could put out a survey online. If you put out a survey online, your data is automatically biased to people who have access to online media to use your data, or not just people who have access, people who are interested in online media. So anybody who is not online is already not part of your data that you're collecting. But if your data collection, I think, is very expensive, so you just need to define what your objectives are. If you're going to be inclusive, sometimes in addition to collecting online, you might need to have field officers on ground who are going to go to some local places where they don't have access to online to collect the kind of data that you want.
All of these just because you want to eliminate bias.
Yes,
in your
you
data.
want your data to be a proper representation.
And not even the holistic approach, it's
that's
for the collection. Okay, interesting. I mean, I'm just like trying to look at it from the constraint perspective, both from the business and time. And I'm just thinking, I can just set my objective and say, okay, I'm not doing this for the whole world. I'm just doing it for my football club.
Yeah.
Will I be safe?
Oh, well, you may have succeeded in reducing the bias, but then what that does is also it constrains the impact and how much value you can get from that model, because now it just works for your football club. It's not scalable. Another club in another place cannot use it. And well, yeah, I mean, you may say that's what you want, but then that's your objective. So sometimes, just like for every research project, usually trying to limit your objectives could be another way to make your work easier and cheaper, and also reduce bias. But yes, that would help you to sort of reduce the bias. But if you want your solution, your project to be scalable, you have to do a lot more to have a holistic project.
Interesting. Okay, so let's just like try to move away from, because since you mentioned holistic, I'm thinking like, okay, there might be like different facets of this. So let's just take a pause on collection from that end. So what other phase of data processing do we need to also focus on?
Yeah, so when you come to like where you start actually analyzing the data, now like many times you see some sort of news, and then I know you must have seen sometimes when there's a news and then there's a caption, and then people just go with the caption because and they don't read the detail. And but if you take your time to read the detail, you will see that what's in the detail is a lot. It's not necessarily different, but is a lot more than what is in the caption.
Yeah.
So that comes to the part after you have done analyzing your data or whatever. Let's say let's move away from building a model now. Let's say you analyze it and you want to present it. You can choose to present or to focus on a certain part that meets your bias or that passes the message that you want to reinforce. So where that comes in is working with people and working with stakeholders when you are building reports. So that way you ask the stakeholders questions. What exactly do they want to achieve? What do they want to say? Of course, all of this happen at the beginning of the project, because if you don't do that, you might just show like, oh, what are the things that look striking to you? Because like when you have data in front of you, especially when you use a software like Python to analyze data, there's like 1,000 insights. So I can just decide to focus on, if I want my boss to do a certain thing, a certain whatever, I want him to implement a certain idea, I would show only the part of the data that supports that initiative. And there's another part of the data that says something else. But if my boss or whoever is not asking the right questions, and they just, so that's why I said everybody, you need to like get feedback from a lot of people. Have objectives at the beginning of the project. Don't just feel like, oh, anything I see in the data is what I'll present. So you need to have like clear objectives on what you want to achieve, and also every time, like, I don't know how to explain, but you need to look at like different sides of the coin instead of just focusing on one aspect of the data, because like there's a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, when you're saying focusing on one aspect of data, for instance, for someone like me that plays most of my amateur football as a midfielder, naturally I have biases for players that can operate as a midfielder, which means I look at your passes. And now, if you try to like establish a relationship between that and asking questions, which is generating feedback. So what you're essentially saying is that for us to be able to like reduce or eliminate the bias in that kind of presentation or analysis, you need to have more people of different backgrounds.
Yeah, so you need to have midfielders, you need to have goalkeepers, you need to have, so you're asking all of these people, what are the questions that you would like to use data to answer when it comes to, you're asking a manager, you're asking, I don't really know all of the different parts of a football team, but there's midfielders, there's goalkeepers, there's referees. You're asking referees, what kind of challenges do you have in a football match that you think that data would answer? So that way you would then, your eyes will begin to open to other kind of insights that you can't bring out of the data that is not necessarily what a midfielder will be looking out for.
Oh, and with that, you reduce the chance of bias
yes,
in
just
that kind
like
of
involving a lot more people and getting feedback from other stakeholders.
So now, in the holistic approach, you need to be conscious about eliminating it at the collection level, at the reporting level. Do we have other level where we also need to be conscious?
Yeah, definitely too. Sometimes the kind of software that you use to do your analysis, the wrangling or the whatever that you're doing, your transformation, can also can also like bring in some sort of bias. So you just need to like I just said in the beginning, focus on the objective where you're trying to achieve, and be sure that you're using like the right software that will show you what you need. Like for example, some software are limited in maybe the kind of charts that you can use, and if you don't have the correct charts, you might not be showing like the true picture of the insight that you want to show. So you need to be sure that you're using the charts that, or the software that fulfills the purpose of the objective that you're trying to achieve.
I mean, for me, I just want to narrow that sounds like even more like a bias that comes from the experience of the data professional, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because like I know, like online, there's always this argument of one software, one data analysis software is the best. This other one is better than the other. But when you hear experienced people talk, they tell you that there is no best tool. The best tool depends on the project, depends on the objective, depends on the kind of data that you are trying to show. So when your data professional is experienced and they have this versatility with all of the tools, they are not stuck with, oh, this particular tool because they think is the best. Because when you think a tool is the best, you're not going to get the benefits of trying out any other tool. But
Oh,
when
okay.
they can use all of the tools, they know the one that is the best for this specific project because of these objectives that we're trying to achieve. And especially because the tool that you use for your analysis also determines how you are able to disseminate the results.
Oh, okay. Okay. So which
Which
also,
again, bias.
yeah. Okay. Okay. This sounds like a very more complicated topic than I even thought. Yeah, but I think looking at it from how you describe the holistic approach of the conscious efforts we need to make in eliminating that, and I can already imagine how much of biases I've introduced in previous data I've had a chance to analyze or have tried to get together. Now, moving away from the technical part, I'm a business person. The only reason why I'm trying to work with data for my business is just to find room for improvement. Now, from your own experience, what are the possible effects of having biases in your data, especially when it's like too much?
Definitely, like I always say that the whole purpose of data analysis is to, like you said in the beginning, make data-driven decisions. Now, if you made a decision based on, well, what you thought the data was saying, and even though the data was saying A, the data was really saying A, but if you look properly, it's B. But then if you take a decision based on A, what's going to happen is, oh, somebody is going to come back and say, oh, data analyst, but you told us this. And data analyst is going to say, oh, I told you this because you only asked me this. You didn't ask me that. So I just always say it's going to just like lead to people are trying to pass the ball, pass blames around and say, oh, the data analyst misled us. Whereas the data analyst only answered as much as you asked. So that's why when I always tell people that as a data professional, when you're relating with stakeholders and they tell you, oh, can you show me how our players have performed over the years or something, I always ask why. Why do you want to see how our players have performed over the years? So that helps me to know exactly what you're trying to achieve. When you tell me why you want to know how your players have performed, then I'll be able to know exactly what you need to know. Is it how they have performed relative to other global players, or is it how they have improved, or is it how they have performed? You just what exactly you want to know. It helps you to sort of fine-tune the request and
Oh, okay.
reduce bias. So it's really a lot of communication, especially at the beginning of a project, and clearly understanding what the objectives are. That way you know what bias you need to be conscious of. So not just rushing to go and do a project, but clearly understanding what the objective of the project is.
Which, if you're able to do that to a very good level, then you
Yeah,
eliminate
you'll
the
be
chance
able
of
to
making wrong
of making wrong
decisions.
decisions, because wrong decisions can be really expensive. I mean, imagine I build a model that is supposed to predict return on investment on a player, and it was biased, and then somebody uses it and they buy a player, put big money on it. Our model has predicted that this guy will return 500%, and then you buy the player, and then the next year is not returning anything. It's disastrous.
Yeah, interesting. And yeah, thank you so much for taking your time to even explain the details that both from the technical perspective of how we can actually identify and eliminate this bias, and of course from the business perspective of, okay, this might actually derail a business if you are making wrong decision based on data. But there's a burning question in my heart, which is always how, which is all, I mean, always about how I try to look at data. Because from what we've been discussing now, so from the point you've made, you're coming from the perspective of, okay, if you eliminate most, or let me say all possible bias in your data, then I can make a decision based on that in the absolute terms?
So I wouldn't say that you can make a decision in absolute terms. I mean, nothing in life is 100%. I don't know if that's really an actual quote, but I mean, because even for example, you know that when you build models in or you do statistics, there's always something they call like 95% confidence level. So it may never be 100%, but like 95% of the times it will be correct. So if 95% of the time is correct, I mean, that will cover up for the 5% of the time when it's not correct.
Interesting.
But I mean, I really even feel like you cannot 100% remove bias because
Okay.
we're still humans. Even when you take feedback from everybody and because we're not robots, you may not be able to remove bias 100%, but you can reduce it to the barest minimum. And then you increase your chance of making proper data-driven decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that you already like partly agree with me that you can't make absolute decisions because
No,
I was going to go to the direction of, can I call the remaining 5% my gods, or I should call it my bias?
Yeah, so it's a mix of guts and bias. I mean, all of that are then what comes with experience. After your data has told you this guy is going to return, then you also use your experience on, I mean, your experience, your guts, or whatever it is that your intuition, whatever you want to call it, but that would add up to the remaining
But at
5%.
least you have a less bias-prone information at your disposal to make decisions.
Compared to if you didn't even make any effort to remove the bias, your confidence level would have been like 50%.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think you've been able to like discuss this topic from the angles that I think even for myself, I think it's quite beneficial for me in terms of understanding, especially the point of it's something that you don't just wait until the end before you try to remove it. You have to look at it holistically from both the starting phase of asking question, understanding the scope very well as making conscious effort to eliminate the possibility. And for the case whereby you are sure that this is going to introduce a lot of bias, because you are trying to make a conscious effort, you can probably just like reduce your scope and say, okay, I'm not covering this area, this data, this analysis is meant for this area. Yeah, that's very very insightful. Like, and I can only just thank you for coming on the episode to discuss this, and thank you for everything, and hopefully we get you some other time too.
Yeah, thank you. The pleasure is mine. It's been fun doing this. So see you some other time.
Thank you. And that's it from 3 Points on this episode. We continue the conversation around data and football. See you next time.
Bye.